Fund, Community College, and the Charles Lee Center. And the total other funds, for sake of brevity on the slide, these are the funds that you're familiar with in departments like SADAC, the Workforce Investment Board, Stormwater, Grants, Accommodation Tax, C funds, pretrial SPACs, public defender, and so on. Take a look at just how this breaks down across the different functional areas that you have. You see here on this slide how public safety, community outreach, tax collection, judicial public works, all of those break down. I've had some folks ask me before, what does quality of life mean? What groups are in that particular one, since it's not as obvious? This would be your parks, hospitality tax, library, community college accommodations tax. The library comprises about 12 million of that 32 million. While the majority of the funds end up being self-balancing, meaning that the revenue that comes in has to cover the expenses, we can certainly go through those budgets. I'll tell you that they're balanced. The general fund really is, I think, the one that you're most interested in seeing how we balance. So let's take a look at highlights for that. It's, again, $82,574,000 under revenues. That's about $1 million increase from the current year that we're in. We've been forecasting around $900,000 of an increase, and we had the opportunity to take a look at fines, fees, and collections over the last month. And we're comfortable in forecasting an additional $100,000 to our previous estimate, so we're about $1 million in additional revenue. I know that that sounds like a lot of additional money to work with, and we'll talk some more about how the budget pressures have contributed to exceeding that $1 million additional revenue, but it's only a 1.3% increase, so it's a modest, flat increase in revenues. It also assumes that we are not going to receive any additional funding from the state and the local government fund. Some of you have received notification here recently that we're hoping that that's a good assumption, that it won't actually be decreased, but we're counting on in this budget, the local government fund at least being funded at last year's allocation plus the additional allocation that we received shortly after July. Yes.
And refresh my memory, what point of the year will we get the final word on that?
I hate to share this with you, but it'll probably be close to your third reading of the budget. I'm hopeful that we have it before then. The recommended budget doesn't assume a tax increase for the general fund. That'd be your county ordinary millage. At the chairman's request from last year, we assumed that you didn't want us to program any interest earnings. At this point, it wouldn't really be significant. And no use of the general fund balance. We also took a look at some fees that we want to talk about with you today at a later point in the discussion. I think it's probably a good point in this discussion to also take a look at where we've been with the general fund and the local government fund, just to sort of get a feel for some of the financial pressure that we've been under. On this particular slide, I suppose the most, although there's a lot of information that we could talk about with this slide, what you can see is that as late as fiscal year 09, the general fund budget was approaching $92 million, and the local government fund in fiscal year 08 was about at $14.6 million. Both of those revenues have significantly changed. We're down about $4.2 million in the local government fund, and the general fund budget for this year was just over $81 million. There's a couple of things that contribute to that. Obviously, the reduction in local government fund, the decision that was made by the General Assembly, is one of the largest contributors. We've also seen about a $2 million reduction in other state and federal aid. The Palmetto landfill host fees have pretty much diminished. They were at their high back in 08 and 09, and our general fines, fees, and collections have reduced.
Catherine, can you elaborate on the $2 million in other funds? Do you have that information?
We can break it down for you in a spreadsheet, but we're looking at a reduction in grants, in allocations that the state's provided to us for other state functions. I know that we get funding, for example, for the victim witness program, public defender, veteran affairs, elections. And so while none of them are necessarily striking, as not nearly as striking as local government fund, if you collectively pull all those together, it's a $2 million decrease. So in essence, the county has absorbed those in some form or fashion without reducing services. So to take you back to the place that we started at your last council meeting, we shared with you that we received requests for almost $91 million worth of needs. And a couple of comments about that that I think are just very important. First of all, if we had been receiving even our fiscal year 09 revenues, this budget would have been cost contained with very little effort from the departments or you or me, because we would have had enough revenue to meet the needs. I think that the departments submitted budgets that truly reflected their needs, and when you see the priority list for reinstatement and all the things that were cut out, I think you'll agree with me. These weren't budget requests that talked about wants or desires. They truly are needs from the department, and we'll be challenging our departments again this year to try to do the best that they can to provide the same level of service without the additional staff or resources that probably would have been there if we were just operating at 09 levels.
Catherine, would you explain again to the public what the local government fund, it comprises and what it means to us?
Sure. Well, I wasn't in South Carolina. Many of you were back in the 70s when the General Assembly worked with the local governments, municipalities, counties, and others in trying to distribute a number of state revenues in a proportionate amount back to the counties. One of those was gas taxes. And there was a promise made in the statute that a percentage of the state's budget would be reallocated back to local governments to support state functions. They would be things like our circuit court system and other judicial functions, other services that you provide that are not necessarily a product of your ordinances and statutes. So probably the judicial system is the most easily defined as a state function at the local level. And when the economy changed a number of years ago, the General Assembly explained to the local governments that they simply couldn't honor that statute, that their revenues were diminishing and they needed to make some tough decisions. Those tough decisions resulted in millions of dollars being reduced from the local government fund allocation back to counties like Spartanburg. I know in my previous jurisdiction it was a healthy blow again to an urban county like Spartanburg, and the councils were left with decisions about reducing services or trying to find ways to continue at significantly less revenue, as you see here. Spartanburg County, from what I can tell, chose to keep the services and find ways to provide them by doing things like you'll see again in this budget. We're deferring significant capital items to try to get through until the economy turns around in order to meet these additional needs. The court system certainly hasn't slowed down when the economy did. So council has been directing more and more resources in that direction without any revenue to help with that.
Do you know how far off we are? I think that percentage, 4 point whatever percent they agreed to, but how far are we off now on what we should be receiving and what we are receiving projected? Does anyone know?
We hadn't.
Because there's a formula they have in the statute, and I want to think it's probably $4 or $5 million off from where it should be, if not more.
Even if you use the 2009 numbers, we're at least there. And we can certainly get that information back to you. Honestly, we tried to anticipate numbers that you would want us to estimate. We had no hope that the local government fund would restore to 100%, so we didn't calculate it.
Mr. Chairman, if Dale, can I?
Yes, sir, you may.
I asked Jim that question, and his figure she brought to me was $14 million since 2009 that it's cost Spartanburg County alone. And the figure is 4.5, 4.5 of their general budget, and I believe that's in the state constitution.
It is.
And I have found, I've been working with our delegation a lot over the last few weeks, and they're receptive and they want to hear from us. So I think it's important that we all contact them in a nice manner, of course, so we have a good delegation, and just ask them if they would consider honoring the contract that's in the Constitution. Because right now, they're not following the Constitution, I mean, that's correct. So I would encourage you to do that. They want to hear from us. Honestly, our delegation wants us to communicate with them. So I encourage you to do so.
Jeff, and I apologize, Catherine, you may have found these numbers out and like missed me, but, on an average year, our contribution is what, like $11 million? To the local government fund, and we get back, what, 4 to 6?
I don't have those numbers, Chairman Culbert, about what the county contributes in revenues to local government fund and what's redistributed back. I don't have that
I'd be
calculation.
safe in saying though that we're getting back less than 50%.
And again, there's a wonderful story that was published in the state newspaper about a year ago about the local government fund with some folks who were actually at the table when the decisions were made. And it really was intended to be a redistribution of the revenues from the larger counties that are collected from the larger counties to try to help support some of the smaller counties and municipalities, as I recall some of that particular story. So I wouldn't anticipate that Spartanburg County would ever see the total revenues collected at the state level and Spartanburg County ever return. But I can assure you that you're not getting the proportionate share that is defined for Spartanburg County. And again, just to underscore the point, if you were, this would be a very simple work session because the departments would have submitted budget requests that were less than what we were getting in 2009.
We've always been a donor county, Dale.
Yeah.
So, although it would have been wonderful to have had the revenues to have said yes to the various initiatives and continue forward with our capital replacement and improvement plan, that's certainly not where we found ourselves. And so, as you can see, we had to reduce the requested budgets by at least $8 million in order to bring you a balanced budget within the existing millage. So a couple of the pressures that we had in trying to accomplish that, if you take a look at the cost of living adjustment that we provided in fiscal year 12-13, which is the year that we're in right now, probably recall that we delayed the implementation of that adjustment until October, so it was a 3-quarter year adjustment. And we mentioned to you that we would be looking for the additional growth in our collections to try to accomplish a full year implementation for the upcoming year. That's about $250,000, about $250,000 in the general fund. All the other funds had to absorb their portion of that 1 quarter of the year. The police officers' retirement system notified us just about 2 years ago to anticipate a series of changes. The impact on the increase for this year is about $85,000. We've had a series of judicial changes that I want to just highlight for you that really the good news is we have some additional judges that have been assigned to Spartanburg County. We needed them. We needed additional magistrate court judges, and we needed an additional family court judge and an additional circuit court judge. We have cases that need to be assigned to a docket, and it absolutely required additional judges. But of course, there's some costs that go along with increasing your circuit and family court staffing as well as magistrate court, and we've been absorbing it. If you take the magistrate and family and circuit court additions, we're looking at about $750,000 in personnel and capital, and one of those significant capital items involves some renovations to the courthouse in order to add additional courtroom and chamber space. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Just that particular item is about $500,000 of that 750, because we'll have to do some significant renovations to the lowest level of the courthouse, the first level, in order to accommodate additional circuit court, plus security and bailiffs there too. And we'll have to relocate a department in order to accomplish that. Our indigent care state payments, these are mandated costs. Those have gone up. I'm assuming that's because of some of the additional needs in our community for indigent care. That's about $20,000 more this year. Our utilities, postage, telephone, and wireless service charges are all going up in spite of our efforts to conserve and find alternatives. Let me just highlight some of those. In utilities alone, across the general fund, we're up about $90,000. We've been actively looking for additional conservation, additional ways to cut those costs, but they're still going to be going up next year. The postage for the county will be going up about $175,000. In spite of us trying to go more paperless and use electronic methods, there are a number of requirements for us to provide paper documents along with certification of delivery. And as we understand it, the Postal Service will be doing a rate adjustment sometime in the upcoming year as well, and we forecasted that in that additional amount. And with our efforts to try to make sure that our employees and others have information at their fingertips when they're out in the field, we're seeing more air cards, mobile data terminals, smartphones, which is a great use of technology for providing services. But even with the very strong partnership that we have with our wireless carrier, our primary wireless carrier, to reduce costs, we're still going to see about $125,000 across the general fund in increases in wireless services. And you'll hear about a request from me a bit later about trying to go with voice over IP to try to cut some of our costs as well. That's not included in the budget as it stands right now. This is our year to do reappraisal. As you may recall, every 5 years the county reappraises its property to go through a reassessment process. And I really want to hand it to our assessor's office staff. There's many staffs across the county. We have peers in other counties that can validate this for you. Most counties see a significant increase in the cost during a reassessment process by adding staff, overtime, other services. Our team, under the leadership of Earl Alexander, has trimmed that down to just being the cost of mailing publications to or mailing information to our citizens about the reassessment process and what their values are, and additional public notifications with information. So he's trimmed that down to $100,000 or less, but it's still going to be an impact on this budget. And we'll have a chance to talk about health insurance in a bit more detail here shortly, but that certainly has put a pressure on our budget. So here are some of the ways that we try to address those pressures. The county contribution rate for health insurance, we're going to show you how we reduced the health insurance budget for fiscal year 14 by about $4 million. Which will result in a number of changes, and again, we have some specific slides on that here in just a few minutes. We also took a look at how we were charging a couple of the different costs, vehicle, utilities, and some of our IT costs. Let me just mention the vehicle costs. At some point in the last couple of years, all the vehicle costs were folded into fleet maintenance. I'm putting them back out into the departments to help me work with the department heads and elected officials on forecasting this cost going forward. At your seat, what you'll see is how we shifted those amounts into the department. It's no net increase to the budget. We're just taking funds that were already allocated in fleet services in this case, and we've moved it over into the departments. But what you'll see here also, if you're watching that closely, is that we've expanded the motor pool availability and reduced the overall fleet as part of this as well in trying to control the costs. We talked to you last year about discussions with the sheriff and Major Ert about establishing a detention center fund. where they can oversee the revenues and expenses, and if they save money or have additional revenues that can go towards some significant capital costs, you'll see why that's going to be very important here shortly with those capital costs that are needed and are not included in the budget. This gives them the best opportunity to try to tackle some of those costs themselves. There's other opportunities too to try to find some partnerships to get those costs covered as well. I really want to take a moment here to thank the sheriff and Major Urch for their help too with trying to bring down some of our core costs. We did move the utility costs for the detention center to that fund along with the funds that were in the general fund to cover them. And I know that Major Urch is looking at trying to get those utility costs down now that he's seen what those are. And then the software maintenance and information technology for those items that are in the detention center were also shifted to that fund with the funds to cover that. I spoke just a moment ago about the courthouse renovations and security personnel. This is really trying to take a courthouse that I think was built in the 1950s. You can correct me if I'm off on that. But we're trying to use a 1950s space allocation for 2013 level dockets. And I want to, and I hope that you'll bear with me here, I want to give credit where credit is due. I want to thank the clerk of court, Hope Blackley, for helping me with trying to take a really impossible request and make it possible in the courthouse and minimizing the impact on the general fund budget to do so. And then building permit fees. I'd like to spend some time talking with you at your level of interest in building permit fee adjustments. They haven't been adjusted since 1991 in Spartanburg County, and as a result of that, in most cases, building permits were less than half, in some cases 1/3 of the adjoining more rural counties in what we're charging in building permits. I absolutely recognize that the time to adjust building permit fees may not be when the economy is starting to recover, but in meeting with the Home Builders Association and other builders, I think we can work out a way to adjust the fees for them, even at a graduated schedule, where we can still be, I suppose, in line with the building permit fees here that, again, haven't been adjusted in 22 years, and not be the most expensive by any means. Still probably the best value for the dollar in the upstate. And what I'd like to encourage you here is that I think we've presented some revenues in the general fund that will balance the budget. I'd like a chance to include building permit fees adjustment. I'd like a chance to finish the conversation with the Home Builders Association and some other folks involved in the building process, and bring you at second reading the actual fee schedule adjustment. I think we'll be within the revenue estimate that I provided to you.
Captain, would you desire to amend the budget at second reading, or would you advise amending it this morning?
When, if the committee will grant me the latitude of, and really the authority to, in the first reading, to bring back to you at second reading the actual building code fee schedule, the amendment that's really needed for your budget ordinance, I think you may have a copy of it, but it would amend the budget ordinance by inserting section 6 in part 2 of the ordinance that would establish the fees for all building permits required by Spartanburg County, not otherwise specified in the chapter, to be set by a resolution by county council. And we would do that at second reading with you there too. That will help. And if the committee would recommend that as part of your
I'm going
motion.
to step out of the norm here and make a motion as the chairman. I move to amend the budget ordinance by inserting section 6 in part 2. The permanent provisions of the budget ordinance that addresses building code fees. The new section would read as follows. We have that before us. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor, let it be known by the raise of the right hand. So carried.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I'll bring back to you the permanent fee schedule at your second reading, so I have an opportunity to review that. So, targeted expenditure reductions. In addition to those major budget changes, I wanted to go ahead and just answer a couple of questions up front, hopefully to help you zero in on some of the issues that I think are probably of more concern to council. We did maintain the existing frozen positions, and there are no salary increases in this recommended budget. We are going to be showing you here shortly some changes in healthcare that will result in plan design changes and premium increases for our health care benefit. Under operating expenditures, in addition to the individual line item reductions that we did with each department, at the end of our process of reducing the budget, we had to do a couple of across-the-board reductions, which I know you've worked with me now for over a year. You know I don't like across the board, but we had to go ahead and get the budget to fit expenditure or revenues. So uniforms across the board have been reduced by 5%. That's your uniform, clothing allowance, and other related accounts. Office supplies have been reduced by 10%, and training and professional development has been, all accounts have been reduced by 10%. Couple of caveats here. I think this is what businesses do when they're trying to meet their budgets. They reduce expenses that while they're needed, we're going to make do. And we've told our departments that if they reach a point of critical need in any of these areas, to please let us know, and we'll try to make the needed adjustments to provide the services that we need to. We also are looking at ways to cut our postage costs in those areas where we don't have to distribute something in paper. We're going to try to continue to do that by electronics. Again, we can feel some pressure there. In our contractual services, we reduced, renegotiated, and eliminated those contractual services that we could. We have a couple of contracts that are set for an automatic renewal. Well, I say automatic, I wouldn't say that all contracts have those types of provisions, but we have some that were due for renewal that have held their rates for a number of years, and we have negotiated those as low as we can get them. And then again, we talked about utilities earlier. While we made some cuts, we're relying on our departments to help us to reanalyze electricity, water, and sewer usage to try to get those costs down.
Yeah, let me start on utilities a moment. A couple of years ago when we did all the lights, we had some type of agreement that would be capped at a certain amount. Was that for a year, or is that over, or just maybe someone else has been here a while?
Yeah, might be a little help with that. Jim?
Excuse me. Yes, Mr. Chairman, that is one of our ongoing agreements, contractual agreements that we're actually working on right now. It comes with an annual cost, and we're evaluating the value of that annual cost. Actually, I Mike Emery on it this morning. So we'll continue to look at that. We do continue to press the savings side of it as far as the use of the steps that we put in to control lighting, heating, air conditioning, and those kinds of things. We're just not sure that we continue to need the consultation from outside sources to do so. That answer your question.
Sort of.
Thank you, Jim. And Mr. Chairman, the department heads can tell you that we're regularly talking about turn off the lights, try to minimize your use of utilities. It's become just part of our normal operating protocols, just like anybody else who's trying to conserve. That goes for fuel too. It's not necessarily utility, but we're doing our fuel conservation, anti-idling, carpooling, reducing trips, those types of things. You won't, excuse me, you won't see new initiatives and other requests in your recommended budget because there simply wasn't the capacity for those as a general rule. And we've deferred the general fund capital projects. Again, we have a minimal amount of money you'll see in the capital improvement plan that's really for routine maintenance and those things that come up when you run the number of buildings that we do at the age that they are. I think it's like $150,000, so it's not, it's really a very modest, severely limited budget. So that gives us some risks. We do have severely limited financial flexibility to anticipate any changes or emergencies. If there are any reductions in the local government fund, we'll need to regroup pretty much immediately on the budget because again, we're counting on that allocation. Our health insurance claims experience, all of you have been here through the years that we took a look at. Where our forecast was over 20% of an increase in our claims for the upcoming year. The medical industry average seems to be closer to 10 to 12%, so we're obviously above that. We're going to talk in a few minutes about the impact of the Affordable Care Act on just our health insurance claims increases and why we're going to have to, if for no other reason, reduce our claims experience because there's some penalties that are going to come to the county for not doing so. But if you take a look at our claims experience just over the last 4 years, we were probably around $9 million in claims. We're forecasted just a couple of years ago, and we've been increasing at about $2 million a year. You saw that last year. You look at that, we're probably approaching $14–15 million in claims just over a short period of time. There's lots of reasons that we can offer to explain that. Yes, sir.
Catherine, just a question, like the increase this year, I know a few years ago we had a, what I would call a catastrophic cost increase due to one of our employees' premium child. I think that added to $1.2 million. Now, is the increase that we've seen in the past year, is there anything like that influenced it, or is it a general wellness of our employees?
It's a combination. When you talk about high dollar claims, the county does purchase stop loss insurance. Our premium this year is $1.2 million. We were forecasted to go to $1.4 million for that policy for next year because of our claims experience, because we had a number of high dollar claims. In fact, what would be atypical for a group our size. I think I've heard it quoted that about 11% of our plan participants comprise about 80% of the cost of our health insurance plan. You would probably see that number closer to 20 to 25% of participants comprising 80% of the cost. So we had a number of high dollar claims. What we did in trying to address that increase in just the stop loss insurance was we went out to the market with 20 vendors to try to quote our product. Of course, when you have a lot of high dollar claims, that's not a good time to quote insurance for reinsurance. But we actually have we've rebid it yet again, and we have those estimates coming in today. So we're hoping to get that number significantly down to get us some savings just in that area. The medical claims themselves, any provider will tell you that the medical claims themselves, the cost of receiving medical care has been significantly increasing for all plans. In fact, we went ahead, I'll kind of jump ahead in this discussion. We asked, did we make a mistake going self-insured? Should we have stayed with a fully insured plan instead of charting our own destiny and being in control? And what we heard is that with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, what we're sharing with you today about our forecasts and some of the changes that we're making, we would have been spending more in a health insurance premium next year if we had been fully insured. So while it is a risk to be self-insured and we're having to make some decisions that are less than desirable in controlling the costs, it sounds like it was a good decision by council to go self-insured. We certainly can test that theory by bidding it out if you want us to, but that's just what we've heard.
Catherine, I can tell you she is not lying about that. Just about every business, their premiums have increased about 20% just in anticipating the Unaffordable Care Act that soon will wreck haven't applied school districts, fire departments, local government, state governments, and businesses across this land.
I do have, as we get a little farther into the health insurance, Mr. Chairman, I did bring some statistics for you, or some forecasts for you about what the impact would be on Spartanburg County. And these are what sounds like we're gonna be minimally impacted, and these are still astonishing figures to me. And then, some of the other budget risks in EMS, again, my appreciation to Jimmy Green and his staff. They've been letting us know about the impact of the Affordable Care Act on Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements. We are very hopeful that we will receive at least what we forecasted for this current year, and they are actually very involved in appealing some of the decisions on Medicaid and Medicare in order to help make sure that those reimbursements still stay strong for Spartanburg County. If they are unsuccessful in those appeals, that'll be another thing we'll need to regroup on pretty quickly. That could be, anywhere in the $800 to $1 million impact if things don't go as they should. So let's talk about health insurance. The slides here, and we've been kind of circling around it. In fact, the staff sort of predicted this might be the year of discussion about health insurance. So let's go ahead and jump into it. Our goal was to reduce our costs by just over $4 million in our projected health insurance costs. And there's a couple of reasons why we need to do that. Of course, we're trying to provide the most affordable plan for the county to our employees, and in order to right-size it for the budget, we had to reduce our costs. We're having to reduce the trend that we're seeing in increases as well. If we stay at this current trend, Mr. Chairman just mentioned a lot of plans are seeing 20% increases. This county simply, well, as council, you can do anything. I understand that, but I certainly wouldn't recommend that we plan for 20% increases every year in health insurance and try to do what you're trying to do in providing services to our citizens. It's just not feasible from a financial standpoint. Even if you raise taxes, even if you absorb all the growth, we won't be able to keep up with a 20 to 23% increase in health insurance claims. There's also some penalties that go along with the health care changes with this Affordable Care Act. I just wanted to mention a couple of them. These are all moving targets as we hear from our specialists in this area and attend classes ourselves and read things that are being provided. I don't think anybody can answer with absolute certainty what the impact of the Affordable Care Act is going to be on anyone, let alone Spartanburg County. But here are some predictions. In 2014, there is, without a doubt, a tax on healthcare plans in order to help fund, as I understand it, and I certainly stand to be corrected in this because I'm not an expert on the Affordable Care Act, but this particular tax is supposed to try to help fund the exchanges. And for anybody who's keeping up with acronyms, this would be under the CORI side of the Affordable Health Care Act. And if you asked me to break that down for you, I probably could, but you have to give me a few moments. I've caught up with it only as the CORI. For us, part of that will result in about $100,000 additional fee to our health insurance fund that we're trying to, they call it a fee, it is a tax. There also is what's called an employer mandate, and no one can really answer for us if we're going to receive this fine. We don't think that we are, but it has to do with how we structure our premiums for our employee. We think our employee-only premium as a cost of the total health insurance that you provide to employees. We will need to continue to monitor that because the fine is $3,000 per employee, up to 30, and then $2,000 per employee after the first 30. So there's obviously an incentive for us to monitor that very closely to be sure that we don't have an impact from this fine on the employer mandate portion of the healthcare reform. But even with those numbers, yes, sir.
Would you repeat those figures for me again?
Sure. Under the employer mandate, what we've been told is that there is a fine that it has to do with the percentage of the, as I understand it, the premium against the adjusted gross income. And again, I'm not an expert. I don't want to go somewhere where I don't have the knowledge. But what we've been told is that fine is $3,000 per employee for the first 30, and then $2,000 over the first 30. So we're trying to avoid a fine, and we think we have, but as we ask the questions, the folks who can answer them for us say that there's still additional information forthcoming to.
They still do not know. It's supposed to take place in just a few months.
Now, if $100,000 in fines in the neighborhood of $3,000 per employee caught your attention, this next one will probably really catch your attention, and that's an excise tax that's scheduled to come on board in 2018. I know that 2018 seems a far way away, but we're getting ready to go into 2014. And in order to avoid this, we're gonna have to make some changes now. It's a non-deductible excise tax. And it's estimated in publications, numerous publications I've read, that 80% of all medical plans will be subject to this excise tax. Some people have even referred to it as a Cadillac tax, but we'll just stick with excise tax for this discussion. At the current trend of us seeing in excess of 20% increases in our claims, we're probably in that 80% grouping if we don't make some changes, some of which are recommended in this budget proposal. We need to reduce our medical inflation trend to about 5 to 6%. So hang on to those percentages. If we were forecasted for 23%, by 2018, there's a financial incentive for us to get down to 5%, because even if we were at the normal medical inflation trend, our excise tax in 2018 would be 1.5 million. In 2019, it would be 2.8 million. And in 2020, it would be 4.3 million. That's a tax. That's not any additional benefit to our employee as a result of the health insurance plan. It's just a straight tax. And it is designed, as I understand it, to address plans that are, I would say, rich in benefits. A lot of claim payment would be a good example of rich in benefits. So again, those fines on just a 12% inflation rate would be in 2018 1.5 million, 2019 2.8 million, and 4.3 million in 2020. That's just a forecast, but it caught our attention. So what we tried to do in addressing how do we provide a good health insurance benefit plan to our employees and avoid all of this other cost and tax and fee and all the other things that are looming ahead. We tried to bring our costs and cost sharing more in line with what the industry standards are in the book of business for Blue Choice, which seems to be a good standard for care up in the upstate, because a lot of folks use Blue Choice. And we'll show you kind of where we are in comparison here in the slide in just a minute. So trying to minimize the impact on our employees, we started with our reductions in areas that would have the least financial impact on employees. That would be our administrative costs to administer the plan. These would be costs like stop loss and the processing of health insurance claims by our third-party administrator and other things like that. And then we tried to maintain the core benefits that seem to have the highest utilization by the most number of employees. So how do we compare with the industry in the book of business at Blue Choice? I really need you to hang on to this slide as we take a look at where we are in comparison with others that have 1,000 or more employees. Let's just walk through each. I know that this is a protracted discussion, but I think it's a benefit. I hope it's a benefit to you, because we were a little surprised at where we stacked up. For most employers that have 1,000 or more employees, 77% of the eligible employees actually select health insurance by the company. And I'll compare directly to Spartanburg County for each one of these points. We're at 92%. So more of our employees elect health insurance coverage than most companies that have 1,000 or more employees. The average cost for that group of employees statistically is about $9,500 per employee. Our average cost is $11,300. In most companies our size, employers pay about 76% of the health insurance benefit. The employees pay about 24%. In Spartanburg County, the county's paying 85%, and the employees are paying 15%. And the employee share of allowed claims is 30%. In these other groups, we're about 18%. Now, please understand, this is a great benefit for our employees, and if I could stand before you today and tell you make no changes, I would if you could afford it, because our employees appreciate this benefit and would want to keep it just as it is. I just don't know how we can afford it. So that's the theme going forward. We're trying to rank ourselves closer with other employers with 1,000 or more employees. So let's get into the specifics about the health insurance plan adjustments. We're recommending that we cap the county's contribution to the Medicare Advantage plan. These are for folks who are on our plan, believe they're retired and 65 years or older to qualify for this. Just cap it at $73 a month. That's what we're paying this year. That's forecasted to possibly increase in the future, and we're asking to cap it. This will also impact our OPEB liability. A number of you have asked us about our OPEB liability, which we'll be working on with this particular committee in the months to come, but this will help our OPEB liability. As we mentioned, we reduced administrative fees with Blue Choice. I mentioned to you that we rebid our stop loss insurance with 20 carriers. We've actually rebid some of the responses we got to that, trying to drive that cost down. We should know something today. So certainly by second reading, we can help you with what that cost is. In those situations where our employees have spouses that have health insurance availability at other companies, we're recommending a change from coordination of benefits to a maintenance of benefit. This is when we have, and Mr. Chairman, if I can use you, you and your wife are both employed and both have access to health insurance. If you choose to have your spouse on the county's insurance and they have insurance with their other employer, those two insurance policies coordinate to minimize the impact of the health insurance cost for you. Sometimes that may be advantageous financially because the premiums are low enough to make it worthwhile. This would, instead of coordinate them, they would maintain the benefit of Spartanburg County, and I'd be glad to go through that in more detail, but that may be kind of getting into the weeds with you. We mentioned earlier the Affordable Care Act fees. We're anticipating a $100,000 tax in the upcoming year in 2014. We are recommending the addition of a smoking surcharge to our health insurance plan. This isn't a social statement. Almost every plan has a smoking surcharge. The exchanges that the federal government are rolling out will have a smoking surcharge. And so we're recommending an addition of that to our plan. We've minimized that smoking surcharge to be less than others are charging. That would be $20 per employee per month, and for dependents, $40 per dependent per month. We're also, it's been recommended to us to add a surcharge for spouse or dependents who choose Spartanburg County's health insurance when there is available coverage with their employer. This seems to be customary in many health insurance plans for large groups. So we're working on the exact surcharge amount, but I would predict that it would be in the probably $90 range for spouses and $70 for dependents. It still may be financially viable for our employees to choose that based on how much more health insurance costs at their other employer. There would be a surcharge for choosing ours when there's coverage available. This wouldn't impact if you have, if you're eligible for Medicaid or Medicare. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about health insured plans with employers.
Catherine, on that 100,000 fees, see if you can find out. I've been unable to, but does that money go to the Affordable Care Act to fund it, or is it going into the general operations of the federal government?
Mr. Knight, the best answer I've received about what happens to that $100,000, and again, this is just the answer that I received, was it will go to help fund the exchanges that are being designed by the federal government. I don't know how we would trace this if we wanted an accountability for where our funds are going, but we can certainly ask once we send the fee out. And then, we're still really finalizing some plan design changes to minimize the impact on our employees. And I'll talk to you next about some forecasted premium increases. Of course, if we can reduce the cost of administering the plans or reduce our claims, we certainly, in this case, our focus would be on trying to get the premiums reduced. So this looks like, if everything goes as scheduled, this is where our premiums would be, and then if we can lower them, we of course will. So here's the semi-monthly increase. If you recall, when we talked about health insurance premiums last year, we did a real modest increase in comparison, and we mentioned then that we would probably be forecasting more significant changes to our health insurance premiums. Again, nothing is cast in stone here, but just offers a good talking point and starting point for council. We would be increasing the semi-monthly health insurance premium for single coverage by $10.89. Let me point out to you that that's the post-tax number. Since these are all pre-tax amounts, the effective increase would be less than $10.85 because it goes through the pre-tax calculations and will be effectively less. Not by much, but it's at least a little, and in this case, a little that counts.
Catherine, this might be the first time I asked this question, but I do remember years ago, there was a thing called cafeteria plan where you could, put an employee pre-tax. So is that feasible in a work environment as big as ours?
Sure, we are allowing our employees to pre-tax their health insurance under would be section 125 language. I've been working with Tony Bell about expanding that to allow for medical reimbursements. We really need to dovetail that with the beginning of a calendar year because medical care reimbursements are best predicted over the tax year, which doesn't run concurrent with our fiscal year. But that would allow our employees to take medical care costs that are allowable under the section 125 legislation up to, I think it's $2,500. I saw something in the Affordable Care Act that actually tagged medical reimbursements and reduced the maximum, which is assumption. But in any event, that would allow our employees to kind of predict if they're going to have a surgery or some other medical cost that was abnormal, and they can actually pre-tax that amount in a medical reimbursement account and pre-tax it, so it's actually a savings. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes, ma'am.
They allow that for dependent care too, and a number of our employees do use dependent care. Gives them a chance to get a break on that as well. We'll try to roll that out together. So, kind of walking through the semi-monthly adjustments and the monthly adjustment. Again, the single would increase by $10.89. Semi-monthly, we have 26 pay periods. We charge health insurance 24 of those pay periods, so it actually works out to be a monthly premium divided into 2 payments per month. Spouse coverage would increase by $43.45 semi-monthly, children by $43.84, and family by $79, which brings our new premiums to single coverage $76.22 per month, spouse $280, children $282.52, and family at $543.56. Took a quick look at some of the larger health insurance plans and trying to right-size this. I think it's comparable. It's not, certainly, if I could sit here and not increase premiums, I would, but this was the minimum adjustment that we strove for, and again, we'll try to reduce these if we can. So, last year, it seemed to be something that you appreciated, is taking a look at what's not in the budget and how to reinstate it if you happen to have that opportunity with additional revenues. Folks have asked me, how do you get additional revenues? Well, we may have predicted a growth rate that's lower than what the economy ends up producing, which would be a blessing for us. We actually could hope that the local government fund would increase. You never know when other revenues may present themselves. So what we offer to you here in this handout that you're looking at is really a full recap of everything that's not in the budget that really, honestly, probably needed to have been. And we tried to give you a couple of starting points, just to help you prioritize that reinstatement. You'll see in the first grouping what I would describe as one-time capital or one-time charges. That total, if you're just interested in that, is about $950,000. That would be the first maybe 2 dozen items. If you add all those up, it's right around $150,000. The next section is what I had mentioned earlier. It is the recap in prioritized order of the detention center needs. Those total about $1.3 million. I know that Major Urch and the Sheriff are working on trying to cover some of those capital needs out of savings that they're actively working on this year. We can continue to update that list for you, but they certainly, as you can see there, those aren't desirable needs, those are real needs. When you're talking about washers and dryers and those types of things, I'd argue that those are pretty essential. And then a couple of you have asked me about some of the pressures on a few of our departments. We're starting to see some I suppose added challenges in areas. I know that Steve Ballou must be here, and I hope he'll forgive me for singling him out, but he's down 13 positions and still trying to answer all of your citizens' complaints and needs with 13 fewer people. So you'll see that I've recommended, if we're going to look at unfreezing positions, he has a number of those on that list to try to get us back on track. And again, my appreciation not only goes out to Steve Ballou, but to Jamie Nelson. I could keep going through the list, but those two individuals have increased their service delivery with fewer people, and I certainly appreciate all their efforts in that regard. But there'll come a time we can't keep that effort at that level. And then the rest of them, you'll see in department order, is the rest of the list, and if you total all of those, that's almost $3 million in additional reinstatements that are just in department order. Again, this isn't a set list, it's just a starting point for you, and if you would like to spend some more time with that, take a look at what those particular initiatives are, we'd be glad to go through them with you. What we've done over the last year, if you recall, we used the budget amendment resolution process at each of your scheduled meetings to take up those items that we have identified additional revenue for, and that's what we anticipate doing here if that's your pleasure. And if you'll hang with me, I got a couple more slides on the general fund, and then we'll, after you've taken your final motion on the general fund, we'll move to the capital improvement fund. But we've got a couple more areas that are not specifically general fund related, but need to be addressed as part of this discussion. Our millage agencies are not seeing any millage change. That would be the Spartanburg Community College, Charles Lee Center, or the library. I wanted to talk to you briefly about the Parks Fund. And truly any of these departments or funds deserve a lot of discussion. Fortunately for the Parks Fund, you spent some time in your committee meetings with the Livability Committee over the course of the year, and again at council meetings, looking at a parks enhancement plan, which is cost constrained, meaning that we implement it when the funds are available to be implemented. One of the services that we have been working on over the last year to try to help expand is those services that are provided to our seniors. And we have identified in working with our partners at Spartanburg Regional and others in the community that there is a really wonderful model for us to take a look at that's being operated by the senior centers of Spartanburg at the Chesney Senior Center. It combines private partnerships, which you've identified as being one of your goals to partner in the community, and also uses volunteers to expand senior services. And in the recommended budget for the Parks Department, we are suggesting that we do a pilot project to expand senior services. We would foresee that project then, if it works, that template rolling out into T.E. Edwards, Woodruff, Cleveland Park, and Tiger River, as well some of our larger centers. That is gonna put pressure on the Parks Enhancement Plan, because we do pick up additional maintenance personnel in fiscal year 15 and 16 with Batamar Park and Holston Creek. So we're gonna, at the current millage projections, we may be short on being able to add those maintenance personnel. And I want to bring that to your attention. If we need to make some adjustments to the parks budget to not try to take on those senior services, I certainly understand, but we were going to try to make a run for it to add those. And then in your fire service areas, the next slide gives you a recap of what the various fire departments have, the fire service areas have submitted as their budget request, what the current millage is, and if any adjustments were made, what would the additional revenue be? You're asked this question every year, so I thought we just anticipate it and share it with you. A couple of things on this slide I want to point out. Cooley Springs and I think the UNA Fire Department are both provided in your packets, needs that would exceed the millage cap. And I think Duncan and Inman Community, if my notes are correct, are not looking for any additional revenue in their budget request. But the rest are sort of in between, being over the millage cap and their request. And those are in your packets. I think you also have some letters from some chiefs who couldn't be here today because of some scheduling challenges. And they wanted to be sure that you understood where they were coming from in their requests. And that really wraps up my overview of the general fund budget. That was a high-level review. We're ready to answer any questions that you may have and try to help you with additional information before we move on to the capital improvement. I hope that was helpful for you.
Anybody have any questions?
I would like to point out, I had asked Jim to go back to the local government fund. I had asked him to provide me with some information about all the unfunded mandates that the state puts on us, and the information was supplied by the Association of Counties. Your $11 million figure is correct. Basically, it's what we're getting. I believe the figure that was supplied to us was 15 million is what we should have been getting. And all the unfunded mandates are 37 million, so there's still 22 million that's out there, plus the 4 million that the local government fund's not funded. Now, I don't have all that information, but Jim provided to me and could give any council member that wanted if I could ask him for.
Catherine, Spartanburg County, Ruby, Bill Washington County.
We sit around 4 and 5 traditionally.
Back and forth. What, Jeff, you've been around longer than I have, and I do appreciate the statement you made earlier that we need to encourage our delegates. Do our delegates stand strong enough in the size of our county that could make a difference in swaying the House and the Senate?
It will not hurt. I actually saw Steve Blue at the show when he was handing me I had to pick on Stevie. But yes, I think you should, and I think they want to hear from you. They really do. Again, in a nice, respectful manner, but we should be heard on this issue. And I think the Association of Counties, again, they're working on this endeavor as well.
Well, and I know I have, and I feel that the other 6 council members have done the same in following years, or in past years, rather. I appreciate your statement. I think it needs to encourage us to get you to turn and ramp it up a little bit.
Maybe Catherine, your staff could continue to communicate and see where that stands. We get our letters on Friday. It would be helpful if we move through this process to know if there's additional revenues or if there, there were just a few months ago, they were talking about reducing this again, so.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman, we're very anxious about
That
the
would blow you
reception.
out of the water if that would occur.
As soon as we know, I promise that you'll know, and if you'll do the same if you hear something, I recognize that you'll be asking us to come back with some recommendations. At this point, I dare say that we're looking at, probably reducing positions, reducing pay, and we'd have to look at our recurring expenses, and I sure don't wanna have that facing us.
Now, you've got this presented today with no tax increase. What
Yes, sir.
is available, due to growth in CPI as a millage increase?
Sure. If you wanted to look at adjusting your millage for, CPI, which is shown at a rate of 2.7%. You could adjust the millage by 1 mil, which would result in additional revenue of $885,447. I know that many of you have asked for the translation of that on the tax increase on a $100,000 owner-occupied house, so we went ahead and pulled that as well for you. An adjustment for CPI of 1 mils would result in $4 on a $100,000 owner-occupied house as an increase. If you adjusted for growth, which sometimes gets a little confusing here for anyone who hasn't been in South Carolina and understands the state statute on these caps, growth is the change in population. It's not growth in collections. It's the additional people coming to Spartanburg County, and it's represented for us at 0.87%. If you adjusted the maximum for growth, you could increase the millage by 0.4 mils, which an additional tax revenue would be $354,000. The tax increase on the $100,000 owner-occupied home would be $1.60. So if you did both, Mr. Chairman, that would be a total increase of 1.4 mils. That would be the maximum for CPI growth. The tax revenue would be $1,239,447 as an estimate, and if you add up that additional tax from $5.60 on a $100,000 owner-occupied house.
Captain, I know it's hard to ascertain at this time, but, and we always use the $100,000 house as our main way of judging this, but as usual, I always want to know how we expect business and industry.
We can bring that back to you. The $100,000, as we understand it, actually the most recent discussions with our home builders association would represent a starter home. We'll be glad to check that out on the commercial side as well.
That'd be $56 on our mill's house.
Oh, Captain,
Yes, sir.
according to the auditor's office, and I hadn't asked her, I don't see her in here, I hadn't asked her lately, but the average house appraisal for in Spartanburg County is less than $100,000, about $91,000 for the average house. I know we use the benchmark of $100,000, but it's below that. That's my wife's house, by the way, Jeff.
I'm trying to light it up in here, folks.
Any other questions, comments? This time I'd like to entertain a motion that we render first reading of this ordinance.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, let it be known by the raising of the right hand. So carries. This time we receive information to take desired action in reference to a budget ordinance to establish capital project budgets for 2013 and 2014. Budget year of the 5-year capital improvement plan. Cole Rouse, who is going to present on this.
I'll tell you, I'll go ahead and take it since I'm on the roll.
Okay, good, Captain. You need a, right?
I'm good. If you guys are good, I'm good.
Unless I'm the chairman, I want to declare a 5-minute break if you don't mind.